It's 11:43 p.m. Your screen is showing two things simultaneously. On the left, a live feed from the security cameras inside a pharmaceutical company's headquarters in Zurich. 17 floors. 212 employees. A server room on the 14th floor containing clinical trial data worth, conservatively, $340 million to the right buyer. On the right, a countdown timer. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. That's how long before their IT security team's automated scan runs and finds the backdoor you installed 6 hours ago. You have 4 minutes to extract everything, close the connection, scrub the logs, and disappear. Your hands are completely steady. That's what worries you most. Not the timer. Not the 17 floors of security infrastructure you've been dismantling quietly since 3 p.m. Not the fact that what you're doing right now is a federal crime in 11 countries simultaneously. What worries you is how calm you are. Because you remember a time when your hands shook just opening a terminal window. You were 19 and studying computer science at a university that was good enough to get into but not good enough to open the doors you'd imagined it would. You weren't exceptional in class. Not failing, comfortably middle. The kind of student professors remember vaguely, if at all. You did the assignments, understood the concepts, wrote code that worked but rarely surprised anyone. What you did outside class was different. You had been teaching yourself since you were 14. Not from textbooks, from forums, from documentation, from the specific pleasure of breaking something small to understand how it worked and then putting it back together slightly differently. You had the kind of mind that found locked doors interesting not because of what was behind them but because of the lock itself. In your second year, a classmate mentioned a website. Not casually, he was nervous when he mentioned it, in the way people are nervous when they're telling you something they find exciting and slightly transgressive. He said there were forums on the dark web where people talked about security vulnerabilities the way your professors talked about theoretical concepts, except these people had actually exploited them. Real systems. Real results. You downloaded Tor that night. The first time you accessed the forums, it felt like finding a library that existed in a different dimension from the one your university operated in. People discussing zero-day vulnerabilities in major operating systems. Detailed breakdowns of penetration testing techniques. Exploit code shared openly, annotated, argued over, improved by collective intelligence. You read for 6 hours straight. You told yourself it was research. That understanding how attacks worked was the same as understanding how defenses worked. That security professionals needed to think like attackers. All of that was true. It was also true that you kept coming back every night for 3 weeks before you posted anything yourself. Your first post was technical. A write-up of a SQL injection vulnerability you'd found in a small e-commerce website, not a company you had any relationship with. Just a site you'd been using to practice on because its security was visibly poor and it was clearly not maintained by anyone paying attention. You didn't exploit it for gain. You documented it. Described the vulnerability structure, the injection vector, the potential impact. Posted it on the forum under a username with no connection to your real identity. The response surprised you. Within 12 hours, 14 people had replied. Not with the vague encouragement of a university forum. With specific, technical engagement. Corrections to your methodology. Suggestions for more efficient approaches. One person pointed out a secondary vulnerability you'd missed entirely and explained, in 3 sentences, why it was actually more dangerous than the one you'd found. You had never felt more intellectually engaged in your life. You kept posting. Write-ups of vulnerabilities you found in practice environments. Analysis of publicly disclosed exploits. Your own tool modifications, small improvements to existing scripts that made them faster or harder to detect. Your reputation on the forum grew quietly. Not dramatically, you weren't doing anything dramatic yet. But your username accumulated a history that people in the community recognized as technically serious. 6 months after your first post, a private message arrived. The username was one you recognized, someone whose posts you'd read and respected for months. Seen your presence on the forum. Consistently precise and never careless. The message was short. I have a client who needs a specific piece of work done. It requires your particular skill set. The payment is significant. Are you interested in hearing more? You read it 3 times. Then you typed, "Tell me more." The job was simpler than you expected. A small competitor intelligence operation. A mid-sized company wanted access to a rival's internal project management system, specifically the roadmap documents showing what products they were developing and when they planned to launch. Not financial data. Not personal information. Corporate strategy documents that existed in a gray zone of industrial espionage that companies conducted against each other constantly through legal means and occasionally through illegal ones. You told yourself the distinction mattered. The target system was running outdated project management software with a known authentication bypass vulnerability that had been patched 8 months ago, but clearly not applied here. You were inside in 40 minutes. Located the relevant documents in 20. Extracted, encrypted, and delivered them through a dead drop system your contact set up in 11. Total time, 93 minutes. Payment, $4,700 in Monero, in your wallet before you went to sleep. You lay in your student apartment staring at the ceiling and thought about the 93 minutes. The focus of it. The way every other thought had gone quiet while you were working, the low-grade anxiety about assignments and grades and the future, and what you were going to do with a degree that wasn't opening any doors, all of it gone. Just the problem and the solution, and the clean satisfaction of moving from one to the other without friction. You had never felt that way in a lecture hall. You checked the wallet balance one more time before sleeping. $4,700. More than your monthly student loan disbursement. For 93 minutes of work that had felt less like work than anything you'd done in 2 years of university. You told yourself it was one job. Temporary. Just to see what it felt like. Word moved through the forum the way reputation always moves in closed communities, slowly, then suddenly. Your contact referred you to a second client. The second referred you to a third. Each job slightly more complex than the last, each payment slightly larger, each new client arriving with a more specific requirement, and a clearer sense that they were paying for something they couldn't get through normal channels. You developed a process. Every job began the same way. Reconnaissance first, passive information gathering, nothing that touched the target system directly. Open source intelligence. DNS records. Employee LinkedIn profiles that revealed technology stacks. Job postings that inadvertently described internal infrastructure. You could build a detailed map of a target's security posture without ever sending a single packet to their servers. Then the approach. Custom tools for each job. You never reused exploit code unchanged because reuse created patterns and patterns created attribution. You wrote modifications by hand, tested them in isolated environments, verified their behavior before deploying against a live target. Then the extraction. Clean, minimal, targeted. You took exactly what the client specified and nothing else. Not because you had ethical objections to taking more, you'd stopped reasoning carefully about ethics around the 4th job, but because scope creep increased dwell time and dwell time increased detection risk. Then the exit. Log scrubbing. Backdoor removal. Connection cleanup. You left systems the way a careful surgeon left a patient, closed, clean, no unnecessary traces. You dropped out of university in your 3rd year. Not dramatically. You just stopped going. Stopped submitting assignments. Received automated emails about academic standing that you read once and archived. Your student loan continued disbursing for 2 months before the administrative systems caught up with your absence. You didn't need it anymore by then. You rented a better apartment. Cash deposit, month to month. Furnished it with equipment, for monitors, dedicated hardware for different operational functions, a network setup that separated your legitimate internet presence from your operational infrastructure with an air gap you physically maintained. Your rates climbed with your reputation. $4,700 for the 1st job. $12,000 for the 5th. $28,000 for the 9th. $67,000 for the 12th. A 3-week engagement targeting the internal communications system of a hedge fund, extracting pre-announcement trading information for a client whose identity you deliberately didn't investigate. You were 21 years old. A year into operating through referrals, your contacts suggested something different. There were markets on the dark web, structured platforms, escrow systems, reputation scores, where hackers listed services and clients purchased them directly. No intermediary. No referral chain. Direct access to a global client base. You were skeptical. Markets were visible. Visibility created risk. Your contact pointed out that your referral chain was also visible. Every person in it was a potential weak link, someone who could be pressured or compromised and whose cooperation could unravel the connections leading to you. You spent 2 weeks studying 3 different markets. Their operational security. Their escrow mechanisms. Their dispute resolution processes. The way their most successful vendors maintained anonymity while building verifiable reputation scores. Then you created a listing. No name. No biography. Just a service description and a starting price. You let your first 3 market jobs speak for themselves, completed on time, delivered as specified, 0 disputes. Within a month, your reputation score was in the top 15% of vendors in your category. Within 3 months, you had more client inquiries than you could service. You started a waiting list. Raised your rates. Raised them again. The clients were different on the market. More varied. Corporate espionage was still common. Companies, investment firms, occasionally law firms conducting discovery operations they couldn't officially acknowledge. But there were others. Divorce attorneys wanting access to hidden financial accounts. Private investigators who had hit legal walls. Political operatives wanting opposition research that couldn't be obtained through legitimate means. Once, a client whose description of their needs made you spend 3 days deciding whether to take the job before taking it anyway. You told yourself you had a code. That there were jobs you wouldn't do. You maintained a mental list of categories. No critical infrastructure, no hospitals, no individual civilians without institutional clients behind them. The list was real. You held to most of it most of the time. But the edges of the list shifted gradually in the direction of yes, and you noticed this without stopping it. The pharmaceutical job came through the market with a budget that made you read the message 3 times. $340,000 for a single engagement. Clinical trial data from a Zurich-based pharmaceutical company. A competitor wanted the results of trials that were still in progress, before the company could publish or patent them. The budget told you 2 things. The client was institutional. No individual paid $340,000 for corporate intelligence without significant resources behind them. And the target was hard. Companies with data worth stealing at that level invested accordingly in protecting it. You spent 3 weeks in reconnaissance before touching anything. The target ran a modern security stack, next-generation endpoint detection, network traffic analysis, a security operations center with 24/7 monitoring. Their IT team was competent, and their infrastructure was maintained. This wasn't a company that had forgotten to apply patches. You found your entry point not in their technology but in their people. A junior IT contractor whose personal email was connected to a domain that had been compromised in a breach 2 years ago. His reused password, the same one from the breached domain, still worked on the contractor portal for the pharmaceutical company's vendor management system. You were inside the vendor system in 4 minutes. From the vendor system you moved laterally. Carefully. 1 hop at a time, each move designed to look like normal network traffic to the monitoring systems watching for anomalies. You mapped the internal network over 6 days, coming and going in short sessions, never staying long enough to trigger duration-based alerts. The server room on the 14th floor. The clinical trial database. The authentication system protecting it, a custom implementation with a logic flaw in its session management that took you 4 days to fully understand and 1 hour to exploit. You installed the backdoor on a Tuesday afternoon during a window when the security team's attention was directed at a minor incident you'd manufactured in a different part of the network. 6 hours later you were watching the live camera feed and the countdown timer. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Your hands completely steady. 3 minutes 40 seconds. You initiated the extraction script. Targeted, precise, only the clinical trial folders the client had specified, nothing adjacent, nothing additional. The script compressed and encrypted as it copied, minimizing both transfer size and the window during which the data existed in readable form on any system you touched. 2 minutes 20 seconds. Transfer at 67%. You watched the progress bar with the same attention you'd once given exam countdowns, except this felt nothing like exams. Exams had always felt like performing for someone else's standards. This felt like operating entirely within your own. 1 minute 10 seconds. Transfer complete. You initiated the log scrubbing routine, 14 months of refinement, capable of removing traces from 7 different log systems simultaneously while mimicking the gaps natural hardware failures created. Not perfect. Nothing was perfect. But good enough that finding the traces would require forensic resources most companies didn't deploy unless they already knew they'd been breached. 40 seconds. Backdoor removed. Connection closed through 4 proxy layers that you'd already begun dismantling from the far end, working backward, each hop disappearing behind you like footprints in water. 10 seconds. You closed the final connection. Opened the encrypted package. Verified the contents against the client's specification. Complete. Accurate. Clean. You sent the delivery notification through the market's messaging system. The escrow released within the hour. $340,000 in Monero, distributed across 7 wallets you'd prepared in advance. You sat back in your chair. The monitors showed nothing now. Normal screens. Normal processes. No pharmaceutical company. No countdown timer. No clinical trial data that belonged to researchers who had spent years producing it. You ordered food. Ate at your desk. Went to sleep at 2 a.m. In the morning you checked the market. 4 new client inquiries overnight. You opened the first one. 2 years into operating at this level, you developed a habit you couldn't explain. After completing a job, any job, regardless of size, you would spend 30 minutes researching the target. Not for operational reasons. The job was done. The research had no purpose. You'd look at the company's website. Read about what they actually did. Sometimes find the name of the person whose credentials you'd used as your entry point, the contractor with the reused password, the executive whose session token you'd hijacked, the administrator whose misconfigured system had been your doorway. You never did anything with this information. You didn't reach out. You didn't feel guilt in any actionable sense. You just looked. You weren't sure what you were looking for. After the Zurich job, you looked up the pharmaceutical company. Read about the clinical trial. The condition it was targeting, a rare neurological disorder affecting children. The trial results you'd extracted and sold to a competitor who would use them to accelerate their own program, cutting years off their development timeline by standing on research they hadn't conducted. You read about the children in the trial. Their families. A quote from the lead researcher about what the results meant. You closed the browser. Opened the market. Responded to the 4 client inquiries. The habit continued. You kept looking. You kept coming back to the market. The looking and the working existed in parallel, 2 activities that seemed to cancel each other out without either one stopping. You were 23 years old. Your wallet held more money than you knew how to spend. Your operational security was as tight as you knew how to make it. No law enforcement agency had ever come close. You'd watched the forums carefully for signs of infiltration and seen nothing that pointed toward you specifically. You were not free. You understood this the way you understood the architecture of any system you worked in, structurally, completely. You could not talk about your work. Could not explain your income. Could not take credit for the thing you were genuinely best at in the world. You existed in a space that had no legitimate surface, no story you could tell anyone, no version of yourself you could show your parents when they asked how things were going. You told them freelance security consulting. They said that sounded interesting. You said it kept you busy. You were not caught either. Not surveilled, not compromised, not close to exposure by anything you could detect. You were in the middle. Exactly in the middle. The place with no name, and no exit sign, and no clear indication of which direction led out. On a Thursday evening with nothing scheduled, you sit in your apartment and do something you haven't done in 2 years. Nothing. No job. No reconnaissance. No forum. No market. Just the 4 monitors on standby and the hum of the equipment, and the city outside the window doing what cities do after dark. You think about the 19-year-old who downloaded Tor because a nervous classmate mentioned a website. Who read for 6 hours and felt like he'd found a library in another dimension. Who posted a SQL injection write-up and felt the specific pleasure of being understood by people who spoke the same language. That person had been curious. Genuinely, cleanly curious. The lock interesting because of the lock, not because of what was behind it. You're not sure when that changed. There was no single moment. No decision you can point to. Just a long sequence of small yes that each felt reasonable in context, and that together produced something you couldn't have agreed to if you'd seen it whole at the beginning. You open a terminal window out of habit. Stare at the cursor. Close it. Somewhere right now a company's security team is running its nightly scan. Finding nothing because you were there 6 hours ago and left nothing to find. Feeling secure in the way people feel secure when their instruments show them what they want to see. Somewhere right now a researcher is working late on a clinical trial, not knowing that the results exist in a competitor's hands already. Somewhere right now a 19-year-old is downloading Tor for the first time because a classmate mentioned a website. You look at the market dashboard. 3 new inquiries since this morning. The cursor blinks on the empty terminal. You think about the countdown timer. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Hands completely steady. You wonder when you stop being the person who would have found that stillness alarming. You open the first inquiry. Read it. Start typing.